The scream cut through the trees before Mira even saw the smoke. She dropped the basket of herbs she was carrying and ran toward the sound, her bare feet slapping against the cold forest floor. Branches tore at her arms as she pushed through the thicket, but she barely felt them. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong at Blackthorn Camp, and every instinct in her body told her to run faster. When she broke through the tree line, she saw it. Smoke rising from the eastern huts. People running in every direction. The sharp, panicked howls of wolves echoing off the hills. Mira froze for only a second before her feet carried her forward again. She was an Omega, the lowest rank in the pack, and she knew her place. She was not supposed to run toward danger. She was supposed to hide, to stay small, to let the stronger wolves handle whatever threat had come. That was what every person in Blackthorn had told her since she was a child. Stay out of the way. Know your place. You are not one of the strong ones. But her place did not matter to her right now, because somewhere in that chaos was a small boy who trusted her more than anyone else in the pack. Kale, the Alpha's only son, 6 years old, with a gap in his front teeth and a laugh that could make even the coldest pack members smile. He liked to follow Mira around the camp because she was the only person who never made him feel like a symbol instead of a boy. She taught him how to skip stones. She let him nap in the sun beside her when his nursemaids were too busy training future warriors to notice him slip away. If something was happening in the east huts, Kale might be there. He often was, playing near the storage tents with the other young children while the adults worked. Mira ran harder. She passed a warrior named Callum, blood streaming from a cut above his eye, shouting orders no one seemed to hear. She passed 2 women dragging a wounded man toward the healer's tent. The smell of smoke was thick now, mixing with something sharper, something that made the hair on her arms stand up. Fear, not just her own, the fear of the whole camp, rolling off everyone like heat from a fire. Ashfangs, someone shouted. The Ashfangs are here. Mira's blood went cold. The Ashfang pack had been circling Blackthorn territory for months, testing the borders, watching from the shadows. Everyone had known this day might come, but no one had believed it would come so fast, or so quietly. There had been no warning howls, no time to prepare. She reached the storage tents and her heart nearly stopped. The area where the children usually played was empty. Overturned baskets, a small wooden toy horse lying in the dirt. No children, no nursemaids, just silence, and that silence terrified her more than any scream could have. "Kale?" she called out, her voice cracking. "Kale, where are you?" No answer. She spun in a circle, scanning the trees, the tents, the shadows between the huts. Her heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her throat. She had promised herself, the very first day she held that small boy's hand and led him away from bullies who mocked her rank in front of him, that she would always look out for him, even if no one else in the pack valued her, even if she was nothing more than an Omega to them. She would keep that promise. A branch snapped behind her. Mira turned fast, her body tense, ready to run or fight or do whatever she needed to do. But it was not an enemy. It was Nora, one of the older women who helped tend the camp's youngest pups. Her face was pale, her hands shaking. "Mira," Nora gasped. "Thank the moon, you're alive. Have you seen the boy?" "No. I'm looking for him now. What happened? Where is everyone?" Nora's eyes filled with tears. "They came from the ridge, so many of them. The Alpha is fighting them near the northern wall, but I think some of them slipped past. I lost track of Kale when the fighting started. I thought he was with his father's guards, but now I can't find anyone who's seen him." Mira's stomach dropped. If Ashfang wolves had slipped past the main fighting, if they were somewhere inside the camp right now, and if Kale was alone. She did not wait to hear more. She turned and ran toward the quiet part of the camp, the place near the old creek where Kale liked to hide when he wanted to escape his lessons. It was the first place she thought to check, because it was the place only she and Kale knew about. A small hollow beneath a fallen log, hidden by ferns, where he would go when the world felt too big and too loud for a 6-year-old boy. She prayed to every star in the sky that he was there. The sounds of fighting grew fainter as she moved away from the main camp, but that did not make her feel safer. It made her feel more alone. She pushed through the ferns near the creek, her breath ragged, her heart hammering. "Kale," she whispered, not wanting to shout in case something dangerous was listening. Kale. It's me. It's Mira. A small rustle came from beneath the log. Relief flooded through her so fast she nearly collapsed. She dropped to her knees and pulled back the ferns, and there he was. Kale, curled into a tight ball, his knees pulled to his chest, his small hands covering his ears. Tears streaked his dirty face. "Mira," he sobbed, and threw himself into her arms. She held him tight, feeling his whole body shake against hers. "I've got you. I've got you now. You're safe." But even as she said the words, she knew they might not be true. The fighting was still happening somewhere in the camp, and she had no idea how close the danger truly was. She needed to get Kale somewhere safer, somewhere with real protection, not just a hollow log and an Omega with no fighting skill to speak of. "Can you walk?" she asked gently, pulling back to look at his face. "We need to find your father's guards. They'll keep you safe." Kale nodded, still trembling, and took her hand. They moved carefully through the trees, staying low, staying quiet. Mira kept her body between Kale and every shadow, every sound, every possible direction danger could come from. She had no weapon. She had no training. All she had was her determination to get this child back to safety, and right now, that felt like the only thing in the world that mattered. As they neared the edge of the trees, close to where the camp's main paths began, Mira heard something that made her blood run cold. Footsteps. Not running, not panicked. Steady, deliberate footsteps, moving with purpose. She pulled Kale behind a wide tree trunk and pressed a finger to her lips. He nodded, his eyes wide with fear, and pressed himself against her side. Through a gap in the leaves, she saw them. 3 figures in dark clothing, moving with the silent grace of trained hunters. They were not blackthorn wolves. She did not recognize their faces, but she recognized the markings on their arms, the same markings Nora had described when she spoke of the Ashfang scouts who had been seen near the border in recent weeks. They were searching for something, or someone. One of them turned his head slightly, scanning the trees, and Mira's heart stopped. His eyes were sharp, predatory, the eyes of someone who had hunted before and knew exactly what he was looking for. She realized with sickening certainty what, or who, that might be. The Alpha's only son, the heir to Blackthorn. If the Ashfangs could not defeat Blackthorn's warriors in open combat, striking at the bloodline itself would cripple the pack for a generation. It was the cruelest kind of strategy, and it was working exactly as planned. Mira pulled Kale closer, her arms wrapping around him protectively. She could feel his heartbeat racing against her own chest, could feel how small and fragile he was compared to the danger stalking just beyond the trees. She had no plan. She had no weapon. She had nothing but her body and her will, and in that moment, she knew with absolute certainty that both of those things would be enough, because they had to be. There was no other option. There was no one else close enough to help. The footsteps grew closer. Mira pressed her lips to the top of Kale's head, a silent promise passing between them. Whatever happened next, whatever came through those trees, she would not let it reach him. Not while she still had breath in her body. She thought of every moment she had spent with this child, the way he giggled when she made silly faces to distract him from his fear of thunderstorms, the way he had once told her, with the simple honesty only children possess, that she was his favorite person in the whole camp, because she never made him feel small. The way he had fallen asleep against her shoulder more times than she could count, trusting her completely with his safety. That trust was not something she was willing to break. Not today. Not ever. The footsteps stopped. Mira's breath caught in her throat. Through the leaves, she watched one of the dark-clothed figures turn directly toward the tree where they were hiding. His head tilted slightly, as if he had caught a scent, or heard a sound too faint for ordinary ears. Kale's hand tightened around hers, his small fingers digging into her palm. "Stay behind me," Mira whispered, so quietly it was barely a breath. "No matter what happens, stay behind me." She had no idea what she was about to face. She had no idea if she would survive the next few minutes. But she knew, with a certainty that settled deep into her bones, that she would not run. Not this time, not when it mattered most. The figure took a step toward their hiding place, and Mira, the Omega no one had ever believed in, stood her ground. The figure took another step, and then another, moving with the slow confidence of a hunter who believed his prey had nowhere left to run. Mira's mind raced through every possible option, and found almost none. She could not fight 3 trained assassins. She could not outrun them while carrying a frightened child. All she had was the small hollow space behind the tree, and whatever courage she could summon in the next few seconds. Then, from somewhere behind the dark-clothed men, a horn sounded. It was deep and long, the kind of sound that carried across the entire valley, and Mira recognized it instantly. It was the call of the Blackthorn warriors, signaling a gathering point, a rally against the invaders. All 3 men turned their heads toward the sound, distracted for just a moment. That moment was enough. Mira grabbed Kale's hand and pulled him deeper into the trees, away from the path, away from the men who had been hunting them. She did not look back. She did not stop to see if they were following. She simply ran, her lungs burning, her legs aching, pulling the small boy along beside her as fast as his short legs could carry him. They stumbled through the underbrush, branches scratching at their skin, until they reached a narrow gap between 2 large boulders that Mira remembered from her childhood. It was a place she used to hide as a girl, back when the other children in the pack teased her for being an omega, for being weaker, for being different. She had spent countless hours curled up in that gap, wishing she belonged somewhere. Now, she pulled Kale into that same gap, wrapping her body around his, shielding him from view. "Are they gone?" Kale whispered, his voice trembling. "I don't know," Mira admitted honestly. She had learned long ago that lying to children rarely helped them, even when the truth was frightening. "But we're going to stay very quiet and very still until we know it's safe." Kale nodded, burying his face against her shoulder. She could feel his small body shaking, and she wrapped her arms tighter around him, humming a soft tune under her breath, the same tune she used to sing to calm him during thunderstorms. It was a simple melody, nothing special, but it seemed to help. His shaking slowed. His breathing steadied. Minutes passed. The horn sounded again, closer this time, and Mira allowed herself a small flicker of hope. If the Blackthorn warriors were gathering nearby, if reinforcements were coming, then maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. She peered out from between the boulders, scanning the trees for any sign of danger. The forest seemed quiet now, the earlier chaos replaced by an eerie stillness. But Mira knew better than to trust silence. Silence could mean safety, or it could mean the enemy was simply waiting, patient and unseen. "We need to keep moving," she whispered to Kale. "Can you be brave for me a little longer?" Kale lifted his head, his tear-streaked face set with a determination that surprised her. For a moment, he looked less like a frightened child, and more like the future leader his father hoped he would become. "I can be brave," he said quietly. "You're being brave. I can too." Something about those words settled deep in Mira's chest, giving her a strength she did not know she had left. She took his hand again, and together they crept out from the boulders, moving toward the sound of the horn. They had not gone far when Mira heard voices ahead, low and urgent. She held her breath, pressing herself and Kale against a tree trunk, listening carefully. The voices were speaking in low tones, discussing search patterns, splitting up to cover more ground. She recognized the cadence of the speech now. It was not the friendly, familiar accent of Blackthorn warriors. It was the clipped, precise speech of the Ashfang pack. Her heart sank. They had not escaped the danger. They had simply run in a wide circle, right back toward more of the enemy. She pulled Kale in the opposite direction, moving as quietly as she could manage, praying that the fallen leaves and soft moss beneath her feet would not betray their presence. Every snap of a twig sounded like thunder in her ears. Every rustle of leaves made her flinch. They reached a small ravine, steep and rocky, cutting through the forest floor. Mira hesitated. Climbing down would be difficult, especially with a child, but it might also provide the cover they desperately needed. She looked back the way they had come, and saw movement between the trees, dark shapes, moving with purpose. There was no more time to hesitate. "We're going to climb down," she told Kale. "I need you to hold on to me very tightly, and trust that I won't let you fall." "Can you do that?" Kale nodded, wrapping his small arms around her neck as she lowered herself carefully over the edge of the ravine. The rocks were slick with moss, and more than once her foot slipped, sending a shower of loose stones clattering down into the ravine below. Each time she froze, waiting to see if the sound had drawn attention, before continuing her careful descent. By the time they reached the bottom, her hands were scraped and bleeding, her arms trembling with exhaustion from carrying Kale's weight for so long. But they were down, hidden in the shadow of the ravine walls, at least for now. She set Kale down gently and allowed herself a moment to catch her breath. Her whole body ached. Her heart still pounded from the fear of the chase. But they were alive. They were together. And somewhere out there, Blackthorn warriors were fighting to reclaim their territory. "How much farther until we're safe?" Kale asked, his voice small. Mira wished she had a real answer for him. The truth was, she did not know where safety lay anymore. The camp itself was under attack. The paths she knew were being watched by enemy scouts. She was an Omega with no fighting skill, no weapon, and no plan beyond keeping this child alive for one more minute, and then one more after that. "We're going to find your father," she said finally, deciding that was the only answer that made sense. "He's fighting near the northern wall. If we can reach him, or reach any of the Blackthorn warriors, we'll be safe." Kale's face brightened slightly at the mention of his father. "My father is the strongest wolf in the whole pack. He'll protect us." "He will," Mira agreed, hoping desperately that it was true, that the Alpha was still standing, still fighting, still able to protect the son he loved so deeply. They followed the ravine northward, staying low, staying hidden. The sounds of fighting grew louder as they moved, the clash of bodies and the fierce growls of wolves in their shifted forms echoing off the rocky walls around them. Mira's stomach twisted with every sound, knowing that somewhere in that chaos, people she knew, people she had grown up alongside, were fighting for their lives. As they neared the end of the ravine, Mira spotted a narrow path leading up toward the northern wall, the tall wooden barrier that marked the edge of Blackthorn territory. If they could reach that wall, they would be within sight of the main battle, close enough to call for help from any nearby warriors. She helped Kale climb up out of the ravine, and together they crept toward the path, staying close to the tree line for cover. The sounds of battle were deafening now, growls and shouts and the sharp clang of weapons meeting, and Mira had to force herself to keep moving forward instead of turning back in fear. They were close, so close. Mira could see the northern wall now, could see figures moving along its length, could hear the Alpha's voice rising above the chaos, commanding his warriors with fierce authority. Relief washed over her, so strong it nearly buckled her knees. They had made it. They were almost safe. But then, from the trees behind them, a voice spoke, low and cold, freezing the blood in Mira's veins. "There you are." She turned slowly, pulling Kale behind her, and found herself face to face with one of the dark-clothed men from earlier, his eyes gleaming with cruel satisfaction, a blade already drawn in his hand. He had found them. Mira did not move. She could not move, not with Kale pressed against her back, not with the northern wall so close and yet impossibly far away. The man before her smiled, slow and confident, the kind of smile worn by someone who had never once doubted his own strength. "Step aside," he said, his voice calm, almost gentle, as if he were speaking to a child instead of issuing a threat. "I have no interest in you. Give me the boy, and you can walk away." "No," Mira said, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. The man's smile faded slightly, replaced by something colder. "You're an Omega. You have no strength to stop me. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." I said no. Behind her, she felt Kale's hands grip the back of her dress, his small body trembling but still. She could feel his fear, but she could also feel something else, a kind of trust so absolute it nearly broke her heart. He believed she could protect him. He believed it completely, without question, the way only a child could believe in someone. She would not let that belief be wrong. The man took a step forward, and Mira instinctively took a step back, positioning herself more fully between him and Kale. Her mind raced, searching for any option, any weapon, anything at all that might give her an advantage. There was nothing. No stick, no stone within reach. Nothing but her own body and her own determination. "Run," she whispered to Kale, without turning her head. "Toward the wall. Run as fast as you can, and don't stop, no matter what happens." "I won't leave you," Kale whispered back, his voice cracking. "You have to. Please, Kale, run." The man lunged forward, and Mira threw herself sideways, putting her body between the blade and the space where Kale stood. She felt a sharp, burning pain across her arm as the blade caught her, but she did not fall. She grabbed a handful of dirt and leaves from the ground and threw it directly into the man's face, buying herself a precious second. "Run!" she screamed, and this time, Cale obeyed, his small legs carrying him toward the wall as fast as they could go. The man snarled, wiping dirt from his eyes, and turned his attention fully onto Mira. She backed away, keeping herself positioned between him and the direction Cale had fled, refusing to give him a clear path to chase the boy. "You'll regret that," the man growled, and this time there was no calm in his voice, only fury. He came at her again, faster this time, and Mira barely managed to twist away, feeling the blade slice across her shoulder. Pain exploded through her body, sharp and blinding, but she forced herself to stay standing, to stay between the man and the path Cale had taken. From somewhere behind him, two more figures emerged from the trees, drawn by the sounds of the struggle. Mira's heart sank as she realized she was now facing 3 trained fighters, armed and skilled, with nothing but her own body to defend a child who was still not yet safely behind the wall. She thought of every reason she had been given, throughout her whole life, for why she did not matter. Every whispered insult, every dismissive glance, every time she had been told that Omegas were weak, worthless, better seen and not heard. She had believed those words for so long that she had almost stopped fighting against them. But right now, in this moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was the small boy running toward the wall, the boy who trusted her with his life, the boy who deserved to grow up and become the kind of leader who would never make another child feel small and unwanted the way she had felt for so many years. She would not let him down. The first man came at her again, and this time Mira did not simply dodge. She stepped forward, inside the arc of his blade, and drove her elbow into his throat with every bit of strength she had. He staggered back, choking, giving her just enough time to turn toward the second attacker. But she was not fast enough. A blade caught her across the ribs, and she cried out, stumbling, her vision swimming with pain. She forced herself to keep her feet under her, to keep standing, to keep her body between these men and the path toward the wall. "Cale," she gasped, praying he had made it far enough away, praying he was close enough to the warriors now that someone would see him, would recognize him, would come running to protect the Alpha's son. The third attacker circled around her, trying to flank her position, and Mira knew with sickening certainty that she could not defend against all 3 of them at once. She had no training, she had no weapon. She had nothing but sheer stubborn will, and against 3 trained killers, will alone might not be enough. But she had to try. She had promised herself, and she had promised Cale, silently, in every moment she had spent caring for him, that she would keep him safe. She would not break that promise now, not even if it cost her everything she had left to give. The first man, having recovered his breath, came at her again, fury written across his face. Mira braced herself, knowing she could not dodge this time, knowing the blade would find its mark. She thought, in that split second, of Cale's laugh, of his small hand in hers, of every stolen moment of joy they had shared, despite the world telling her she was not worthy of caring for him. She thought it was worth it. Whatever happened next, it was worth it. The blade came down. Mira twisted her body at the last possible second, and instead of finding her heart, the blade caught her across the side, a burning line of fire that stole the breath from her lungs. She fell to one knee, gasping, blood soaking through the fabric of her dress. She should have stayed down. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to curl into a ball, to protect herself, to give in to the pain radiating through every part of her. But somewhere behind her, still too close, still not far enough away, she heard a small voice calling her name. Cale had stopped running. He stood frozen a short distance away, torn between the instruction to flee and the sight of the person who had protected him being hurt. His young mind could not process leaving her behind, no matter how many times she told him to run. "No," Mira gasped, forcing herself back to her feet despite the pain screaming through her body. "Cale, keep running, please." But it was too late. The second attacker had noticed the boy's hesitation, had seen him standing there, exposed and vulnerable, and turned his attention away from Mira entirely, moving toward the true target of this entire attack. Mira did not think, she simply moved, throwing herself into the path between the attacker and Cale. Putting her body directly in the line of the blade, meant for a child who had done nothing wrong, except be born into a bloodline someone else wanted destroyed. The blade found her again, this time across her back as she turned to shield Kale completely with her own body. She screamed, the sound tearing from her throat before she could stop it. But she did not fall. She would not fall. Not while Kale stood behind her, his small hands clutching the back of her dress, his face buried against her spine. "Stay behind me," she gasped, her voice barely a whisper now, blood loss making her vision blur and swim. "No matter what, stay behind me." The three attackers regrouped, circling now, recognizing that this Omega, weak and untrained as she was supposed to be, was not going to move aside. Frustration replaced their earlier confidence, and with frustration came increased violence, increased desperation, to finish what they had started before Blackthorn reinforcements arrived. The next blade caught her thigh, and she nearly collapsed, only stubborn will keeping her upright. Another caught her forearm as she raised it instinctively to protect her face. Each wound sent fresh waves of agony through her body, each one bringing her closer to the darkness that threatened to swallow her vision entirely. But still, she did not move from her position between Kale and the men who wanted him dead. Distantly, through the roaring pain and the ringing in her ears, she heard something new. Voices, shouting, the pounding of feet against the ground, growing closer with every passing second. She could not tell if it was salvation arriving or simply her own mind conjuring hope in her final moments, but she clung to the sound anyway, using it as an anchor against the darkness pulling at the edges of her vision. Another blade found her, this one across her collarbone, and she finally felt her legs begin to buckle beneath her. She had taken so many wounds now that she had lost count, her body a map of pain, blood soaking through every layer of fabric she wore. But even as her strength failed, even as her vision darkened, she kept her body angled to shield the small boy still pressed against her back. "I've got you," she whispered, though she was not certain anymore if the words were meant for Kale or for herself. "I've got you. I won't let go." The voices grew louder, closer, and then, through the haze of pain clouding her senses, she heard a roar unlike anything she had ever heard before, a sound of pure fury and protective rage, and she recognized it instantly. The Alpha, Kale's father, had arrived. What happened next came to her only in fragmented pieces, glimpses through a vision growing darker by the second, the sound of bodies colliding, the sharp cries of the attackers as Blackthorn warriors descended upon them with a fury born of desperation and love for their pack's youngest member. The feeling of strong arms catching her as her legs finally gave out completely, unable to support her weight any longer. Mira, a voice, familiar, filled with a fear she had never heard directed at her before. She thought it might be the Alpha himself, though her mind was too clouded with pain to be certain. "Stay with us, stay awake." She wanted to answer, wanted to ask if Kale was safe, if the boy she had bled for was truly unharmed, but the words would not come. Her body felt impossibly heavy, and the darkness at the edges of her vision was spreading faster now, swallowing everything. The last thing she heard, before the darkness finally claimed her completely, was a small voice, choked with tears, calling her name over and over again, begging her not to leave him. "Mira, please, please wake up, please don't go." And then there was nothing at all. The Alpha, a broad-shouldered man named Alaric, did not remember making the decision to lift Mira from the ground. His body simply moved, driven by instinct and horror at the sight of an Omega covered in wounds. Wounds that should have belonged to his own son. Wounds she had taken instead without hesitation. Around him, his warriors finished driving off the remaining attackers, though two of the three managed to escape into the trees before they could be captured. Alaric did not chase them. In that moment, nothing mattered except the fragile, bleeding woman cradled in his arms and the small boy clinging desperately to her limp hand. "Kale," Alaric said, his voice rough with emotion he rarely allowed himself to show. "Are you hurt? Did they touch you?" Kale shook his head, tears streaming down his face, his eyes never leaving Mira's pale, still form. "She saved me, Father. She wouldn't let them near me." She just kept standing there. Even when they hurt her, she wouldn't move. Alaric felt something shift inside his chest, a mixture of gratitude so profound it was almost painful, and shame that cut even deeper. This was the Omega his pack had dismissed, ignored, treated as unworthy of respect for her entire life. And when the moment came, when everything mattered most, she had done what none of his trained warriors had managed to do. She had reached his son first, and she had refused to let him fall. "We need to get her to the healer," Alaric said, his voice sharp with urgency now, cutting through his own guilt to focus on the immediate need. "Now, she's lost too much blood." He carried her himself, refusing to hand her off to another warrior despite the offers, moving as quickly as his legs could manage, without jostling her wounds further. Kale ran alongside them, his small hand gripping the edge of Mira's sleeve, refusing to let go even for a moment. Word spread through the camp faster than Alaric could have anticipated. By the time he reached the healer's tent, a small crowd had gathered, drawn by the sight of their alpha carrying a bleeding Omega with an expression on his face that none of them had ever seen before. Whispers followed him, questions about what had happened, about how badly she was hurt, about whether she would survive. The healer, an older woman named Ivy, who had tended to the pack's wounds for longer than most could remember, took one look at Mira, and her face went pale. "Bring her inside. Quickly. I need space, and I need it clear right now." Alaric laid Mira down on the healer's table, as gently as he could manage, though every movement seemed to pull a fresh line of blood from one wound or another. Ivy immediately began assessing the damage, her experienced hands moving with practiced efficiency despite the horror clearly visible on her face as she counted the wounds. 8, Ivy murmured, almost to herself. 8 separate wounds. How is she even still breathing? Kale tried to push his way closer to the table, desperate to stay near Mira, but Alaric caught him gently by the shoulders, pulling him back. "Let Ivy work," he said softly. "She needs room to help her." "But she saved me," Kale sobbed, fighting against his father's grip. "I have to stay with her. She said she wouldn't let go, and now I have to stay with her too." Alaric knelt down to his son's level, his own eyes suspiciously bright. I know she did, and I promise you, we are not leaving her side. But right now, the best way we can help her is to give Ivy the space she needs to save her life." Kale's shoulders sagged, but he stopped fighting, allowing his father to pull him into a tight embrace instead. Around them, the crowd outside the tent had grown larger, warriors and pack members alike gathering to learn the fate of the Omega, who had thrown herself between 8 blades and the heir to their entire bloodline. Inside the tent, Ivy worked with grim determination, cleaning and stitching wound after wound, her expression growing more troubled with each one she addressed. The wounds were deep, several dangerously close to vital areas, and the blood loss alone was enough to threaten Mira's life, even before considering the risk of infection or complications. "She shouldn't have been able to keep standing after the 3rd wound," Ivy said quietly, more to herself than to anyone else in the tent, let alone the 4th or 5th. "I don't understand how she remained upright long enough to take 8. Alaric, still holding his son close, found himself staring at the unconscious woman on the table, with an expression he could not quite name. He had known Mira only in passing before today, a quiet Omega who kept to herself, who tended to the pack's youngest children with a gentleness that had never quite registered as remarkable to him before. He had certainly never imagined she possessed this kind of courage, this kind of willingness to sacrifice everything for a child who was not even her own blood. "Will she survive?" he asked, his voice quieter than he intended. Ivy did not answer immediately, her focus remaining on the wound she was currently stitching closed. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight of uncertainty that did nothing to ease the tension building in the tent. "I don't know. The next few hours will tell us more than I can promise you right now. Her body has been through more trauma than most warriors twice her size could withstand. Whether she has the strength left to recover from it, only time will tell." Kale made a small broken sound against his father's chest, and Alaric held him tighter, wishing desperately he had answers to offer his son beyond the uncertain truth Ivy had given them. Outside the tent, the whispers continued to grow, spreading through the camp like wildfire. The Omega who had been dismissed and overlooked for her entire life, the woman many in the pack had never bothered to learn the name of, had thrown herself into the path of 8 blades to protect their future leader, and now her survival hung in the balance, uncertain, while the entire pack waited to learn her fate. For the first time and longer than she likely remembered, Mira was no longer invisible. The hours that followed felt endless to everyone gathered near the healer's tent. Alaric refused to leave, standing just outside the entrance with Kale still pressed against his side, both of them watching the flap of fabric that separated them from the woman fighting for her life inside. Warriors who had fought in the battle earlier that day, some still bearing their own wounds, gathered nearby as well, drawn by a sense of debt they could not quite explain. Callum, the warrior Mira had passed earlier in her desperate search for Kale, stood among them, his own injury bandaged but his attention fixed entirely on the tent. He had known Mira for years, had even joined in the quiet mockery other pack members directed her way, dismissing her as weak simply because of her rank. Now, standing here, waiting to learn if she would survive the wounds she had taken protecting the pack's future, he felt a shame he could not shake. "I never once thanked her," he admitted quietly to the warrior beside him, a woman named Grace, who had fought alongside him for years. Never once acknowledged her, except to laugh along when others made fun of her rank, and she still ran toward danger to save the Alpha's son, while I was busy shouting orders no one could hear. Grace did not offer easy comfort, understanding that Callum's guilt was not something that could be soothed away with kind words alone. Instead, she simply nodded, her own gaze fixed on the tent, silently sharing in the collective weight of realization settling over the gathered crowd. Inside the tent, Ivy continued her work, moving from wound to wound with the focused intensity of someone determined not to lose this particular patient. She had lost people before, in her years as the pack's healer, and each loss had carved its own scar into her heart. But something about this situation felt different, felt like it mattered, beyond the simple value of a single life, though that alone would have been reason enough to fight. "Come on," she murmured to Mira's still form, checking the young woman's pulse for what felt like the 100th time. "You didn't survive 8 blades just to give up now. Fight harder than that." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the camp, word of what had happened continued to spread beyond the immediate crowd gathered near the healer's tent. Pack members who had been elsewhere during the attack, tending to other wounded, or securing the camp's perimeter against further threats, made their way toward the center of camp upon hearing the story. An Omega. A single Omega, with no combat training, no rank, no status within the pack, had stood alone against 3 trained Ashfang assassins to protect the Alpha's son. She had taken 8 separate wounds, any one of which could have proven fatal, and had refused to fall until reinforcements arrived. The story spread with a speed that surprised even Alaric, transforming from whispered rumor into something approaching legend within hours. He found himself fielding questions from pack members, eager to know if the stories were true, if an Omega truly had shown more courage than warriors twice her size and rank. "It's true," he confirmed each time, his voice heavy with an emotion he was still working to understand fully. "Every word of it is true." As evening deepened into night, Ivy finally emerged from the tent, her hands still stained with blood, despite having washed them multiple times throughout the long hours of work. Alaric straightened immediately, his heart pounding with a mixture of hope and dread as he searched her face for any sign of what news she carried. "She's stable," Ivy said, and the words seemed to release a breath the entire gathered crowd had been holding collectively. "For now. The next few days will determine whether she truly recovers, but she's survived the worst of it. Her body has proven far stronger than anyone could have expected." A murmur of relief swept through the crowd, and Kale, who had remained silent and tense for hours, finally allowed himself to sob openly, burying his face against his father's chest. Alaric held him close, his own eyes bright with unshed tears he refused to let fall in front of his gathered pack. "Can we see her?" Kale asked, his voice muffled against his father's shirt. Ivy hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "She's unconscious still, and likely will remain so for some time, but yes, you may sit with her if you wish. Just be gentle. Her body needs rest more than anything else right now." Kale pulled away from his father immediately, moving toward the tent with a determination that belied his young age. Alaric followed close behind, and together they entered the space where Mira lay, bandaged and pale against the healer's simple bedding, her chest rising and falling with slow, steady breaths that had seemed impossible only hours earlier. Kale climbed onto a small stool beside the bed, taking Mira's bandaged hand carefully in his own small ones. "I'm here," he whispered to her unconscious form. "Just like you stayed with me. I'm not going anywhere until you wake up." Alaric watched his son with a swelling sense of pride and gratitude, understanding in that moment that whatever happened next, however long Mira's recovery might take, his pack owed her a debt that could never truly be repaid. She had asked for nothing in return for her sacrifice, had simply acted out of pure devotion to a child, who trusted her completely. He made a silent vow, standing there in the quiet tent, watching his son hold the hand of the woman who had saved his life. Whatever happened, whatever the future held, Mira would never again be treated as unworthy or invisible within his pack. She had earned a place of honor that no one would ever be permitted to question again. Outside the tent, the gathered crowd began to disperse slowly, though many remained nearby throughout the night, keeping a quiet vigil for the Omega who had shown more courage in a single afternoon than some warriors demonstrated in a lifetime. The story of what she had done would spread far beyond the borders of Blackthorn territory in the days to come, but for now, it remained a quiet, private thing, held close by the pack that had nearly lost more than they could bear to imagine. Through the long night, Kale refused to leave Mira's side, his small hand never releasing hers, his whispered words of encouragement continuing, even as exhaustion finally pulled him into a fitful sleep beside her bed. Alaric remained as well, watching over both of them, his thoughts heavy with gratitude, guilt, and a determination to make things right, that burned steadily brighter with each passing hour. In the darkness behind her closed eyes, Mira drifted through fragments of memory, and something else, something she could not quite name. She saw flashes of her childhood, the years spent on the edges of the pack, watching other children play, while she sat alone, told again and again that her rank made her lesser, made her unworthy of true belonging. She saw her mother's face, gentle and tired, whispering words of comfort during the nights, when the mockery of other pack members had cut too deep to bear. "You carry something different, little one," her mother had once told her, though Mira had never fully understood what she meant. "Something the others cannot see yet. Be patient. Your strength will show itself when it matters most." She had nearly forgotten those words, buried beneath years of dismissal and quiet loneliness. But now, drifting somewhere between life and whatever waited beyond it, those words returned to her with startling clarity, as if her mother were speaking them directly into the darkness surrounding her. In her dream, or vision, or whatever this strange floating state truly was, Mira found herself standing in a forest, unlike any she had known before. The trees glowed faintly silver, their leaves shimmering as if lit from within, and the air carried a stillness that felt ancient and sacred all at once. A figure approached through the trees, tall and graceful, features soft with an otherworldly gentleness. Mira could not tell if it was a woman, or simply a presence given temporary shape, but she felt no fear in its company, only a strange, comforting familiarity. "You have given much," the figure said, its voice like wind through leaves, "more than most would dare to give, for a child who is not your own blood." "He needed me," Mira answered, though she was not entirely certain the words came from her mouth, or simply from somewhere deep within her thoughts. "I couldn't let them hurt him. You could have run, you could have saved yourself, and let others bear the burden of his protection. Many would have understood that choice." "I couldn't," Mira repeated, more firmly this time. "He trusted me. That trust meant more to me than my own safety." The figure seemed to consider this for a long moment, silver light shifting and swirling around them both. "There is a strength within you, Mira, that your pack has never recognized, perhaps because you yourself have never fully recognized it either. The rank they gave you at birth was never the true measure of what you carry inside." Mira wanted to ask what that meant, wanted to understand the strange weight behind those words, but the figure was already beginning to fade, the silver forest dissolving around her like mist beneath morning sun. "Rest now," the voice whispered, growing fainter with each word. "Your body needs time to heal from the sacrifice you made, but know this, you are needed still. Your story is not finished, and neither is your strength." The forest vanished entirely, plunging Mira back into darkness, though this darkness felt different now, less like the edge of death, and more like the deep, restorative sleep of true healing. Distantly, as if from very far away, she became aware of a small hand holding hers, warm and familiar despite the fog clouding her senses. Kale. She recognized his presence even in this half-conscious state, the steady warmth of his small fingers wrapped around hers, refusing to let go even in sleep. She wanted to reach for him fully, to reassure him that she was still here, still fighting to return to him, but her body remained locked in its deep healing sleep, unable to respond, beyond the faintest twitch of her fingers against his. Days passed in this manner, Mira drifting between moments of near consciousness and deeper healing sleep, her body slowly knitting itself back together, beneath Ivy's careful attention. The healer changed her bandages twice daily, monitoring for any sign of infection, with the vigilant care of someone determined not to lose a patient she had already decided deserved to live. Alaric visited frequently as well, though he rarely stayed as long as Kale, who seemed to have taken up near-permanent residence at Mira's bedside. The Alpha found himself troubled by thoughts he could not quite shake, memories of every dismissive comment he had allowed to pass unchallenged within his pack, every time an Omega had been treated as lesser without consequence. He had built Blackthorn into a pack of considerable strength and reputation, but he had allowed a hierarchy to persist that valued strength and rank above all else, dismissing qualities like courage, loyalty, and selfless love as somehow less important simply because they did not manifest in obvious physical power. Watching his son cling to Mira's unconscious hand day after day forced him to confront a truth he had avoided for far too long. The pack's true strength had never come only from its warriors. It had come, in this moment, from an Omega willing to sacrifice everything for a child who was not her own, without expectation of reward or recognition. On the 5th day following the attack, as afternoon light filtered softly through the tent's fabric walls, Mira's fingers twitched more deliberately against Kale's hand, and for the first time since the battle, her eyelids began to flutter, struggling against the weight of days spent in deep, healing sleep. Kale, ever vigilant despite his young age, noticed immediately. "Mira," he whispered, leaning closer, his voice trembling with hope he barely dared to feel. "Mira, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered again, and this time, they began, slowly and with great effort, to open. The light in the tent seemed unbearably bright at first, and Mira squeezed her eyes shut again, a soft groan escaping her lips as awareness of her body returned all at once, bringing with it a deep, throbbing ache that seemed to radiate from every wound across her skin. "Mira," Kale said again, his voice thick with barely contained emotion. Please open your eyes again. I need to know you're really awake." She forced her eyes open a second time, blinking against the brightness, until Kale's face came into focus above her, tear-streaked and hopeful in equal measure. A weak smile tugged at the corners of her mouth, though even that small movement sent a fresh wave of soreness through her body. "Kale," she whispered, her voice hoarse and unfamiliar to her own ears, after days of silence. Are you safe? Did they hurt you?" Kale let out a sound that was half laugh and half sob, shaking his head vigorously. "I'm fine. I'm completely fine. Because of you. You saved me. You wouldn't let them touch me, not even once." Relief flooded through Mira, so powerfully that fresh tears sprang to her eyes, mixing with the physical exhaustion, still weighing heavily on her body. "Good," she murmured, her eyelids already growing heavy again despite her best efforts to stay awake. "That's all that matters. Don't fall back asleep," Kale pleaded, gripping her hand tighter. "Please, stay awake. I need to tell my father you're awake. He's been so worried, and Ivy needs to check on you too." Before Mira could respond, Kale scrambled off the stool beside her bed and darted out of the tent, his young voice calling excitedly for his father and the healer, the words tumbling over each other in his rush to share the news. Mira lay still, trying to gather her scattered thoughts, trying to make sense of the strange, fading memory of silver forests and gentle voices that lingered at the edges of her consciousness. She did not have long to ponder it before the tent flap opened again, and Ivy hurried inside, her expression a mixture of professional focus and genuine relief. "There you are," the healer said, moving immediately to check Mira's pulse and examine her bandaged wounds with practiced efficiency. "You gave us quite a scare, young one. How are you feeling?" "Sore," Mira admitted honestly, wincing as Ivy gently checked the wound across her collarbone. "Everything hurts, but I'm alive." "Yes, you are. Against fairly significant odds, I might add." Ivy's tone carried a note of genuine wonder beneath its practical exterior. 8 separate wounds, and you're not only alive, but showing signs of recovery far faster than I would have believed possible. Whatever strength you carry inside you, it served you well these past several days. Mira thought again of the silver forest, the gentle figure who had spoken to her, of strength she herself had never recognized, but she said nothing of it aloud, uncertain if it had been anything more than a fevered dream born from blood loss and exhaustion. The tent flap opened again, and this time Alaric entered, his usual commanding presence softened by an expression of relief so raw it startled Mira to witness it directed at her. He approached the bed slowly, as if uncertain of his welcome, though Mira could think of no reason he would hesitate. "You're awake," he said quietly, his voice carrying a weight of emotion he made no effort to hide. "I cannot begin to tell you how relieved I am to see your eyes open again." "Is Kale truly unharmed?" Mira asked, needing to hear the confirmation directly from the Alpha himself, needing absolute certainty that her sacrifice had achieved what she intended. "Completely unharmed, thanks entirely to you." Alaric's jaw tightened, emotion evident in the sharp lines of his face. "You stood alone against 3 trained assassins, with no weapon and no training, and you did not fall until help arrived. I have warriors who have trained their entire lives for combat, who could not have shown the courage you displayed that day." Mira felt heat rise in her cheeks, unaccustomed to such direct praise, especially from the pack's Alpha, a man who had scarcely acknowledged her existence before this attack. "I only did what needed to be done. Anyone would have done the same for a child in danger." "No," Alaric said firmly, shaking his head. "Not anyone would have. Many would have run, and few could have blamed them for it, given the odds you faced. You chose to stay, to shield my son with your own body, again and again, even as the wounds mounted against you. That is not something anyone would have done. That is something only someone of extraordinary character would choose." Mira did not know how to respond to such words. So unfamiliar was she to receiving genuine respect from someone of Alaric's standing within the pack. She glanced toward Kale, who stood beside his father's leg, watching the exchange with wide, attentive eyes, and found comfort in his presence, in the simple certainty that he was safe and whole because of the choice she had made. "The pack has been asking about you," Alaric continued after a moment, his tone shifting slightly, carrying now a note of something like anticipation. "Word of what you did has spread throughout the camp. Many wish to see you, to thank you properly for what you sacrificed on behalf of all of us. When you feel strong enough, I would like to bring them to you, if you're willing." Mira hesitated, uncertain how to respond to the idea of an entire pack, a pack that had ignored and dismissed her for her entire life, suddenly wishing to gather around her with gratitude and respect. Part of her wanted to shy away from such attention, unaccustomed as she was to being seen, truly seen, by the people she had lived alongside for so long. But another part of her, the part that had stood firm against 3 blades rather than abandon a frightened child, found herself curious what it might feel like to finally be recognized, to finally have her worth acknowledged by the very people who had once made her feel so small. "I think," she said slowly, testing the words as she spoke them, "I would like that." Alaric's expression softened into something close to a genuine smile, the first Mira had seen from him since waking. "Then rest a while longer, gather your strength, and when you're ready, the whole pack will be waiting to meet you properly, for the first time." 2 days later, once Ivy declared her strong enough to sit upright without risking her healing wounds, Mira found herself being helped out of the healer's tent for the first time since the attack, leaning heavily on a wooden cane that Alaric himself had fashioned for her use. She had expected a small gathering, perhaps a handful of pack members curious to see the Omega who had survived such grievous wounds. She was not prepared for what actually awaited her outside. The entire clearing at the center of Blackthorn Camp had filled with people, every member of the pack who could walk having gathered to witness her emergence. Warriors stood alongside healers, elders stood beside young pups still too small to shift, and every single face turned toward her the moment she stepped into the open air, sunlight catching against her pale skin for the first time in days. Silence fell over the crowd, heavy and reverent, as Mira took in the sight before her. Wolves and humans in their shifted and unshifted forms alike, surrounding her on every side, their expressions ranging from awe to gratitude, to something that looked remarkably like shame, for the years they had spent overlooking her presence entirely. She felt Kale's small hand slip into hers, steadying her, as much emotionally as physically, and she glanced down to find him beaming up at her with unrestrained pride. Beside him stood Alaric, his posture straight and formal, carrying an air of ceremony that made Mira's heart begin to race with uncertainty about what was about to happen. "Pack of Blackthorn," Alaric's voice rang out clearly across the gathered crowd, carrying the authority of an alpha addressing his people on a matter of great importance. 5 days ago, our territory was attacked, our warriors tested, and our future nearly stolen from us, in a single afternoon. Many of you fought bravely that day, and I am grateful to each of you for your courage in defending our home. He paused, his gaze shifting to Mira, and the entire crowd's attention followed his, every eye now fixed directly on her, making her wish desperately for somewhere to hide, despite the strength she had shown against far greater danger. But one among us showed a courage that surpassed even our most seasoned warriors, Alaric continued, his voice thick with emotion he made no attempt to conceal. And Omega, a woman our pack has too often dismissed and undervalued, stood alone against 3 trained assassins, armed with nothing but her own body, and her unwavering devotion to a child she loved as her own. She took 8 wounds, any one of which could have ended her life, and she did not fall, not once, not until my son was safely beyond the reach of danger. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd, and Mira felt her cheeks flush hot with a mixture of embarrassment and something else, something warmer, something she had rarely experienced within the confines of this pack. I have failed, as your alpha, to build a pack where every member's worth is measured by their character, rather than simply their rank or their strength in battle, Alaric continued, his voice growing stronger, more resolute with each word. Mira has shown us all, through her actions, that true strength is not always found in claws or teeth or fighting skill. Sometimes, the greatest strength lies in a heart willing to sacrifice everything for someone it loves, regardless of the cost. Alaric turned fully to face Mira now, and to her utter astonishment, he lowered himself onto one knee before her, an act of respect she had never imagined witnessing from an alpha, let alone one directed toward her. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, followed swiftly by more murmurs, this time carrying awe rather than mere agreement. Mira, Alaric said, his eyes meeting hers directly. On behalf of my son, and on behalf of this entire pack, I offer you my deepest gratitude. You saved what matters most to me in this world, and you did so without hesitation, without expectation of reward, simply because it was the right thing to do. That kind of character deserves recognition far beyond anything this pack has offered you before. Around them, one by one, the gathered pack members began to kneel as well, warriors and elders and healers alike, until the entire clearing was filled with wolves, and people lowering themselves in a gesture of respect toward the Omega, who had once walked among them unseen and unappreciated. Even Callum, who had once joined in quiet mockery of her rank, knelt with his head bowed, his expression carrying genuine remorse and gratitude in equal measure. Mira stood in the center of it all, surrounded on every side by wolves who had finally seen her true worth, tears streaming freely down her face, as the weight of years spent feeling invisible finally began to lift from her shoulders. Cale squeezed her hand tightly, beaming up at her with pure, unrestrained joy, and she found herself smiling through her tears, overwhelmed by a feeling she had never before experienced within this camp: belonging. True, complete belonging, surrounded by a pack that finally recognized her not as a lesser rank, not as someone unworthy of respect, but as someone whose courage and love had proven stronger than any blade turned against her. Rise, Alaric said finally, addressing his kneeling pack, though his eyes remained fixed on Mira as he spoke. Rise, and let it be known throughout Blackthorn territory, and beyond, that this woman is to be honored among us, now and always, for the sacrifice she made, and the character she showed when it mattered most. The pack rose together, and a sound began to build among them, low at first, then growing steadily louder, a chorus of howls rising into the afternoon sky, a sound of celebration and honor, unlike anything Mira had ever heard directed toward her before. She stood in the center of that sound, surrounded by wolves who had once overlooked her, now lifting their voices in tribute to the courage she had shown. For the first time in her entire life, Mira understood what it truly meant to be seen, to be valued, to belong completely to the pack she called home. In the weeks that followed, life within Blackthorn camp began to settle into a new rhythm, one shaped by the events of that terrible and transformative day. Mira's wounds continued to heal under Ivy's careful attention, the deepest of them leaving faint silver scars across her skin that she would carry for the rest of her life, permanent reminders of the choice she had made without hesitation. Alaric had not allowed her recognition to end with a single ceremony in the clearing. Within days of her awakening, he had formally elevated her status within the pack, granting her a position of honor that came with respect, resources, and a voice in matters that had previously been closed entirely to Omegas of her former rank. She was given a proper home near the center of camp, close to where Kale and his father lived, rather than the small, drafty hut she had occupied on the camp's outer edges for her entire life. More than the material changes, though, it was the shift in how pack members treated her that meant the most to Mira. Warriors who had once looked past her without acknowledgement now nodded respectfully when she passed. Children who had mimicked their parents' dismissive attitudes now approached her with open curiosity and admiration, eager to hear stories of her courage directly from her own lips. Even Callum sought her out personally, offering a sincere apology for years of quiet complicity in the pack's treatment of her, an apology Mira accepted with the same grace she had shown throughout her entire ordeal. Kale, more than anyone, refused to let the bond between them fade with time. He visited her new home daily, often bringing small gifts, a particularly smooth stone he had found by the creek, a flower he thought she might like, simple childish tokens that meant more to Mira than any formal honor the pack could bestow. Their relationship, already close before the attack, deepened into something even more profound, a bond forged through shared trauma and unwavering loyalty that neither of them expected to fade with the passage of time. "When I become alpha someday," Kale told her one afternoon, as they sat together near the creek where he used to hide from his lessons, "you'll be the most important person in my pack. I'll make sure everyone always remembers what you did for me, and I'll make sure no one is ever treated the way you were treated before, just because of their rank." Mira smiled at his earnest declaration, reaching out to smooth his hair the way she had done so many times before the attack had changed everything between them. "You already understand something many leaders never learn, Kale. True strength isn't about rank or title. It's about the courage to do what's right, even when it costs you everything." As for the Ashfang threat, Alaric had increased patrols along Blackthorn's borders significantly, unwilling to risk another surprise attack of the magnitude they had barely survived. Scouts reported that the rival pack had retreated deeper into their own territory following the failed assassination attempt, though whispers suggested they had not abandoned their ambitions entirely, merely paused to regroup and plan their next move more carefully. Mira found herself, in the quiet moments of her recovery, thinking often of the strange dream she had experienced during her deepest healing sleep, the silver forest, and the gentle figure who had spoken of a strength within her that the pack had never recognized. She still did not fully understand what those words had meant, whether they represented a genuine vision of something greater within her, or simply a fevered dream born from trauma and blood loss. But she found herself paying closer attention now to small things she had previously dismissed, moments where her senses seemed sharper than an Omega's typically were, instances where her intuition proved uncannily accurate about danger or safety, before any obvious signs presented themselves. She said nothing of these observations to anyone, not yet, uncertain what they might mean, or whether she was simply imagining significance where none truly existed. Whatever the truth of that strange vision, one thing had become undeniably clear to everyone within Blackthorn territory. Mira was no longer the invisible Omega, dismissed and overlooked by a pack too focused on rank and rigid hierarchy to recognize true character when it stood among them. She had earned, through blood and unwavering courage, a place of honor and respect that no one within the pack would ever again think to question. On a quiet evening, several weeks after the attack, Mira stood at the edge of camp, watching the sun set over the territory she had nearly given her life to protect. Kale sat beside her, as he so often did now, comfortable in a silence that spoke of the deep trust between them. Alaric approached from behind, his footsteps deliberately loud enough not to startle her, a courtesy she had come to appreciate in the weeks since her recovery. "The pack owes you a debt we can never fully repay," he said, coming to stand beside her, his gaze following hers toward the darkening horizon. "But I hope, in time, that the honor and respect you've earned here will help you understand just how valued you truly are, not just for what you did that day, but for who you are, every single day since." Mira turned to look at him, at the boy sitting beside her who owed his life to her willingness to stand firm against impossible odds, and felt a warmth settle deep within her chest, a sense of belonging she had spent her entire life longing for, without ever truly believing she might find it. "I think," she said softly, watching the last light of the sun disappear beyond the trees, "I already do." Behind them, the camp settled into its evening routine, warriors changing guard along the borders, families gathering for evening meals, children playing in the fading light, before being called inside for the night. The threat of the Ashfang pack remained, distant but not forgotten, a shadow that might return someday, to test Blackthorn's strength once again. But for now, in this quiet moment, surrounded by a pack that had finally learned to see her true worth, Mira allowed herself simply to breathe, to exist, fully seen and fully valued, for the very first time in her life. Whatever challenges the future might bring, she faced them now, not as an overlooked Omega, standing alone in the shadows, but as a woman whose courage had reshaped an entire pack's understanding of what true strength truly meant. And surrounded by wolves, who had once looked past her, she had finally, truly, come home.